Welcome everybody, I'm Hannah if you don't know me, lots of you do know me, and we do have some guests here from Dornoch, which I'm delighted that you've made the trip. I'm the Learning and Access Curator here in the museum, and I normally am the host for the lectures, and so now all eyes are on me and my interest, and for a number of years I have had an interest in the history of golf fashion. That stemmed from an exhibition that we did in our previous galleries, and then I did some work for a lecture that I did in 2012 after the Olympic Games at the Costume Museum, Fashion Museum in Bath. And during that time I've always kept my hand in, always looking at new updates, seeing where golf clothing has gone. And in the last few years, as I'll come to at the end of the lecture, all of our lives have been affected, and our clothes have had an impact from the pandemic. And there are echoes of that throughout history of big major events causing clothing to change. And that's no different than on the golf course. So we'll be going through things tonight. As we're smaller in number, if you've got a question as I go along, you can ask, but I would ask maybe think about it and we can have a wee discussion at the end. As I say, on the odd occasion that I do go out on the links, I always feel more secure, more happy if I'm in my golfing uniform, and I'm sure some of you will feel the same. It's a very odd occasion that takes me out onto a golf course, I have to say, as much as I love it. I have found a new love, though, for hickory golf. Because of last year's museum team bonding evening, we went to Hill of Tarvet, the National Trust property, and their course, the Kingara course. And it was founded in 1924 by the Sharp family. And so I tried to go for, you can't see in this photograph, but I tried to go for a vintage retro style with a tartan skirt and a woolen jumper and a berry. But you feel ready for the sport that you're going to do if you put on your uniform. And what has struck me in looking at golf fashion generally is how much it reveals about the values and the identities that shape the sport, often quietly through fabric, colour, or even etiquette. It's not just what players wear, but what the clothing signals about who belongs and how that's shifting. There's a feeling of belonging that comes from wearing golf clothing, whether that is from your club sweater or tie or through team uniforms or even modern streetwear. Golf has long been part of the fabric of Scottish society. And this image, which is in the club's collection and hangs in the library of the clubhouse, is a view of St Andrews from the golf course, 1740. It's the oldest depiction of golf in art in Britain. It's by an unknown artist, and it's an oil on board piece. This painting is the earliest known depiction of golf in Scotland in art, as I said. It was donated to the club in 1847 by James M. Melville, and the minutes noted that it's a very old golfing painting executed at a time when our ancestors took to the field in wigs and cocked hats. You can see that the gentlemen golfers in the foreground are wearing their traditional outdoor dress. Golfers at this point would be wearing the long nose clubs, I nearly said, that's what they're playing with, long breeches, socks, their tailcoats and ruffled cravats around their necks. The caddies are wearing a simpler version of this dress and carrying the clubs under their arms. The pioneers of this game would go out on the links in their everyday clothes, carrying their clubs. But over the years, as the popularity of the game has grown, special items of clothing became available to make play easier for golfers. Much of the club's collection is dominated by golfers in this formal dress. The red coats are similar to what noblemen wore for all outdoor pursuits, such as hunting and shooting and fishing. But the fashion for captains of a golf club wearing a red coat became popular amongst some of the earliest golfing clubs and societies. This also later translates to some of the women and what they wore, choosing to don the red colour. Also, these coats were worn for practical reasons, for keeping you warm on the Scottish links, and the bright colours would highlight against the green of the links land. With the introduction of societies, golf became more formal. The members of these societies followed the conventions of the time in their dressing for their class and position in the community. Now, if we look at this portrait of John Balfour Hay of Lees, again part of the club's collection and hangs in the big room, he was captain of the Society of St Andrews Golfers in 1774 and is wearing his red golfing jacket. The earliest mentions of the golfing society having a uniform come from 1764. The jacket was usually red, but some societies chose other colours such as blue and yellow and green. The styles of these uniforms obviously come from the military background. Many of the society men had positions within the military. These outfits showed the patriotism of the wearer and also the allegiance to the particular society or club. They represent the power of the wearer, and as I said, practically it keeps you warm. The details of the coat, such as the buttons and collars, were particular to each club, as they are for different regiments. And David Hamilton, who is here tonight, my golfing historian hero, wrote in his book, Golf Scotland's Game, that the uniforms of each club are recorded with pride. The Honourable Company at Leith ordered their first uniform in 1787, a scarlet coat with a blue collar plus blue club buttons. It must have been quite a sight on the links. The uniforms declined in the mid-1800s, but the tradition of the red coat was kept for dinners. Again, today we see that with the captain of the R&A wearing the red coat for ceremonial occasions when he represents the club. Even the blazer and buttons have links to these past military-style jackets. The red coat is hugely prevalent in this painting, The Golfers by Charles Lees, who's from Cooper. We can see the type of clothing worn not only by golfers but spectators of this period in 1847. The painting shows important figures of the St Andrews golfing world, and we can study what the gentlemen golfers were wearing. We see top hats shown, which protected the head, golfing gloves, worn on the right hand, not on the left, and they would have been wearing the leather shoes at this time, no golfing boots. And if we look at the central figure, or one of the central figures, Hugh Lyon Playfair, he gives us a good impression of what a gentleman of his status in society would be wearing. Again, the top hat, the glove on his hand, and his leather shoes. Playfair was provost of the town of St Andrews and captain of the R&A in 1856, and it was he who was responsible for the changes in the town, and also the establishment of the clubhouse itself in 1854. You can see the prominence that he had within the community at being placed in the centre of the painting. His trousers are full-length trousers and, as I say, the top hat and his red coat. Much of this painting was based on early photography, and we're lucky that St Andrews has always been a centre for, or was becoming a centre for many of the pioneers of the science of photography. And the person who bought this painting, Alexander Hill, had a younger brother, David Octavius Hill, who was a landscape painter and began to use photography as a tool to record portrait likenesses. This is the earliest photograph of golf, featuring none other than some of our most famous residents of St Andrews, including Sir Hugh Lyon Playfair, in the same stance that he features in the golfer's painting. The idea of photography was suggested to David Octavius Hill by Sir David Brewster, who was the principal of the United Colleges here in St Andrews. Brewster and his neighbour Hugh Lyon Playfair and local doctor John Adamson had all been carrying out experiments in St Andrews. Hill began working with Adamson's younger brother, Robert, and this was the partnership that raised photography to a new art form. These photographs that are in our collection, in the museum's collection, come from glass plate negative images. and they show the leading professionals of the 1850s. They have at the centre Alan Robertson, the top professional golfer of his period, blurred as he pretends to hit a ball. Men in the 1800s would have stuck to simple attire, particularly true for working men, and there would have been a focus on masculinity and practicality. Thanks to the Industrial Revolution of the 1840s, there was an increasing access to varied patterns. However, working people had the worry of the cost of such fabrics, and so this prohibited large wardrobes. They may have owned their working clothes and perhaps an outfit for Sunday best, perhaps even for golfing matches. Families, of course, would make their own clothes, repair and reuse their garments. In Scotland, we can see that the golfers were wearing woolen or tweed suits by the 1850s. Coats were often known as sack coats, which didn't have a waist or seam or back shaping, which was good for swinging a golf club. In these glass plate negatives, we see the different styles worn by the different professional golfers. So Willie Park Sr. at the back and Willie Dunn have checked suits, whereas Tom and Alan Robertson have more plainer suits. Alongside the players, the caddies are wearing a simpler version of their suits. And Daw Anderson is the only one wearing a lighter coloured pair of trousers, perhaps made from linen or cotton. It's almost in a sailor style dress with the vest. All of the men, of course, have their heads covered with a cap in various styles. Later styles of jacket would develop in the mid-19th century. The Norfolk jacket, the most famous, for use outdoors. It was first made in Norfolk and featured sturdy box pleats, heavy gusset pockets and a matching belt. They allowed for greater freedom of movement for hunting, shooting and of course golf. Now, this photograph has always intrigued me. It's dated from 1860 but doesn't appear to have been taken during the Open Championship. It is Prestwick and it features Charlie Hunter and Tom Morris and some others at the back there. What fascinated me is their clothing. By 1860, the idea of having an Open Championship at Prestwick had emerged, with the Earl of Eglinton, James Ogilvy Fairley and Tom Morris himself being the driving forces behind that first event on the 17th of October. Eglinton, a local landowner, would dress his men in tartan and check jackets in his own named tartan. Could this image of Charlie Hunter and Tom at Prestwick be that same tartan? I did ask various people over the years, including Peter Crabtree, and he agreed that it could well be the same tartan that Eglinton used for his men. If so, I would suggest that this image is the first use of branding in the Open Championships history or golf history. Eglinton backing his players, his favourites for the championship with his family name. The Earl of Eglinton. So I've so far only talked about men. So what about the female perspective? Appropriate dress has always been an issue in the women's game. Costume was initially less about comfort and practicality and more about style. It was not until some groundbreaking fashion choices were made that the tide and many heads turned. This photograph shows the Ladies Putting Club, the St Andrews Ladies Putting Club, in around the 1880s. In 1867, women of St Andrews formed the first women's club in the world, the St Andrews Ladies Club. 20 years later, the club had over 500 members, playing over what is now known as the Himalayas course. Putting was deemed appropriate for daughters of the RNA members, as it wasn't too strenuous. It protected your feminine modesty by keeping ankles and wrists covered, since there was no need to swing a club. You can see, though, that they're not dressed particularly for sport, with petticoats, corseting, bustles and bonnets. Practicality and comfort doesn't seem to have been an issue. There would be no high swings of the club here. There were, however, breaches available for women by the 1890s for activities like cycling and climbing, but they don't seem to have made their way onto the golf course at this point. It's important to acknowledge that women's involvement with sport was generally limited. There was a clear divide between the sexes in terms of physical education during the 19th century, with concerns mostly surrounding women's reproductive health. Living a healthy life, it was felt that women could withstand the rigours of childbirth. Women had to strike a balance between practicality, femininity when playing the sport. By the 1890s, there were courses and clubs being formed across the country. Westward Ho in North Devon was founded in 1868. There were courses for women laid out at North Berwick, Perth, Dunbar, and clubs being formed in Carnoustie, Troon, Bath, Lytham St Anne's, Yarmouth, Ely, Portrush Ladies, and London Links Ladies. With the formation of the Ladies' Golf Union in 1893, and Zette Pearson being the first honorary secretary of that union, we see a formalisation come into women's golf. They established their first championship just a few months after the formation of the union, and these moves caused a stir within the golfing establishment. The union was criticised by two-time amateur champion Horace Hutchinson, who declared that the LGU would fail because women never have and never can unite to push any scheme to success. Gradually, slightly more streamlined outfits began to appear. And if we look to one of our outfits on display from the Women Golfers Museum collection of Mabel Stringer, we can see what a lady of 1894 was wearing. Mabel was a close friend of Zette Pearson and founder of the Ladies' Golf Union, and Stringer played a major role in promoting women's golf, including founding the Veteran Golfers Association and becoming the first female golf journalist writing for the Gentlewoman magazine. Her dress is typical of the time, being fashionable but somewhat uncomfortable. Miss M. Boys, a leading golfer, described in Our Lady of the Green in 1899 what female players should wear. A neat sailor hat surmounting a head beautifully coiffured, every hair of which is in its place at the end of a round. A smart red coat, a spotless linen collar and tie, and an ordinary tailor-made skirt. A pair of well-made walking boots with nails studded in the soles. This is exactly what Mabel is wearing, and her boots are studded with nails. The dress aimed to make women not look too athletic, and furthermore, a black elastic band known as a Miss Higgins hoop would be used to control the skirt in the wind, preserving the modesty of the lady golfers. The way that the corset restricted movement would have affected the lady's swing. The problem of the skirt getting damp whilst playing was a big issue in 1893, and a new forest skirt became popular. Its length could be adjusted from 12 inches off the ground for wearing while playing on the links to 3 inches off the ground while walking home. The skirt had a tuck hidden under which were buttons so that the piece of cloth 9 inches deep could be attached when the extra length was required. It also had a leather bottom piece, which, when conscious about her ankles or the effect of wet grass, could be changed for a cloth piece, dry and respectable. This was perfect for entering the clubhouse. Other early devices for coping with long skirts was a harem pin. This secured the middle of the front of the hem of the skirt to the same part at the back. Now, this image, I hope you can all see it, it's a wee bit fuzzy there. This comes from the Ladies' Golf Union album. We have a lovely collection of photographs. The women documented every part of their history in these photographic albums. This is the women's amateurs, now known the Ladies' British Open Championship, in 1894 at Littlestone. Mabel was captain of that club during that time. And they visited it probably because of that. That shows what other examples of other female golfers were wearing at this time. The 1890s fashion for Lego mutton style sleeves were hugely popular. They were very full at the shoulder and at the top of the arm, and would gradually become narrower and tight to the forearm and wrist. The shape was designed to give contrast to the narrowness of the ladies' waists, emphasising their femininity. For our modern eyes, these fashions seem so extreme and the opposite of what we would choose to wear on the golf course. The women were following not only what was fashionable, but what was socially expected for their class and status in society. In summer, skirts were threaded with wire to keep them down. Skirts had stiff belts which emphasised their waists. For wet conditions, they could be bound with leather or braid, from which mud could be sponged. This was a difficult chore, and in women's magazines, they stated that the only satisfactory method of removing mud stains from the golfing skirt was to dye the skirt the same colour as the mud. These women's outfits are uncomfortable and impractical from our point of view. And it didn't make the male golfer take them very seriously, often laughing at their dress and making fun of their appearance. Within the golfing periodicals of the time, there is mention made to the best places to purchase your golfing attire, particularly in London, and what the latest fashions were. In Golf Illustrated, the 17th of November 1899, they give their lady readers some hints on the type of hat which could be worn. Those in search of a novelty in golfing headgear should make their way to Old Bodden Street, where Mr. Scott has provided for their special edification a very smart felt chapeau trimmed with a band of leather, which is enjoying such a vogue in the millinery of the moment. For this particular purpose, it is adorned with little stud points of silver, matching the two small models of golf clubs, which are crossed at the side of the low crown. And speaking about another type of hat, they advised, on windy links, they are simply invaluable in place of the tam o' shanter's rakish grace or the close-fitting masculine cap, for they are much more feminine and becoming to the average woman, especially for those whose first youth has passed. I fear that I'm in that realm now. Those are the words of warning regarding the skirt, and there are also words of warning regarding the skirt. Golf Illustrated, December 1st, 1899. A lady must remain smart at all times, particularly on the links. Be careful to notice if the skirt shrinks or becomes torn. How often one sees the appearance of a girl otherwise well turned out, quite spoiled by a mud-bedraggled duck's tail at the back of her skirt, when a few minutes with a needle and cotton would have turned her out trim and smart. Remember that nowhere does slovenliness of this kind show up more than on the links, where one is silhouetted against the sky. Again, here fashion and correctness is being promoted over comfort and practicality. To my mind, much like women today, we might be interested in following styles and fashion through reading magazines and social media these days. We adapt our looks to suit our own preferences, our body types, and our purses, and I don't think there would be any difference for the golfing ladies of that era, but with more of an emphasis placed on what society expected of them. Women created some interesting accessories to accompany their look. Henry Leach, in his book, The Spirit of the Links, 1907, described a peculiarity that I noted from looking through the images of the LGU albums. We hear that for most famous lady players carry charms when engaged in their most important games. She who won fame as Miss Rona Adair is said to have invariably worn a particular ribbon with a gruesome device of skull and crossbones upon it whenever she very much wanted to win her match. White heather is supposed to be a most potent charm, and it has been told as a secret that some ladies decline to wash their hands between rounds, though luncheon comes in the interval, but least evil should befall them afterwards. I was absolutely fascinated to see these images of Rona within our photographic albums, and I couldn't understand the skull and crossbone, and it's taken me a wee while to work it out. They often feature Also, she often will wear symbols of Ireland, and we see that in her hat. The Scottish women also wore thistles when playing at the women's amateur and the team events. But the skull and crossbones, I didn't quite understand, but it still serves as a warning that I'm going to beat you. And she did. This superstition is a fascinating insight into her character and feelings against her competitors. So returning to what men were wearing, we see that by the 1890s, men have started to wear one of the most famous pieces of golf clothing, +4s or +2s. If we look at this portrait of Freddie Tate, who's one of my favourites, from 1901, we see him wearing the knickerbocker trousers. These are short, loose-fitting trousers that gather at the knee or the calf, more commonly known as +4s or +2s. His are +2s. So +2s have 2 inches of extra fabric at the knee, and +4s have 4 inches of extra fabric at the knee, and often go below the knee in the 1920s and 30s. The +4s offered a little bit more freedom of movement because of the bagginess that they had. They were most in vogue during the 1920s and 30s, and here's someone modelling a lovely pair. Sandy Herd, the Open champion, said in Golfing Life in 1923, "The first time I saw a golfer wearing a baggy +4s, I thought he looked like a lassie." Looking at the golfing periodicals of the time, we can see a debate on the advantages of knickerbockers versus the trouser. In Golf Illustrated 1911, we learn that Harry Vardon caused something of a sensation when he wore knickerbockers. Vardon still holds the record of the 6 Open Championship victories and was described in the following way. Before the advent of Harry Vardon, the trouser was de rigueur for professionals. And when Vardon, with the privileges of genius, first ventured to appear in knickerbockers, he created something of a sensation. His example has been largely followed by other professionals, and he himself has never wavered in his allegiance to the shorter garment. Among the leading professionals, however, the trouser maintains its supremacy, and there are many of the cracks who have never been seen in knickerbockers. The article then goes on to actually list the professionals who wore trousers versus those who don the knickerbocker, with champions such as Willie Park, Alexander Herd, J.H. Taylor and James Braid all preferring the trouser. And so they surmise, from this it would appear that the trouser has the greatest virtue as a professional hip garment. This painting of the Great Triumvirate by Clement Flower hangs again in the clubhouse and shows Vardon in his knickerbockers with his fellow golfers Braid and Taylor firmly in the trouser camp. We can see from much of the club's artwork of this period male golfers wearing jacket, waistcoat, shirt and tie with a starched collar. Advertisements began to appear in magazines and they give us an idea of what was actually on offer to purchase. A great amount of emphasis is placed on the quality of tweed for men, and sometimes were even named after the stars for the day. And this piece is described as the Braid, so named after James Braid. For women, Thomas Burberry of London introduced in 1904 some improvements into the women's golf clothing sold in his store. They included the free-stroke coat, which had special sleeves that moved freely with the golfer's arms. The advertisement promising, "The coat permits the arms to be swung around like a mill sail without dragging. The body of the coat won't lift when both arms are held straight up. No other sleeve is fit to golf in or will ever be used again after this." There was an emphasis on plain, neat, smart costume that was in no way gaudy. Ever so slightly hemlines for women began to impact their footwear. Ladies could purchase better boots in brown or black leather, which had proper laces and soles that meant you could play on all terrains. On top of your head, of course, would be some kind of headgear, but it was always difficult to find something that would stay in place and not wobble in the wind. Some favoured large brimmed hats and protected them from the sun or tam o' shanters, as the bands would stay on. Gloves would also be worn, usually of white leather. Still seen as a curiosity by many golfers and golf writers, ladies were encouraged to not look too out of the ordinary when playing. Irish golfer May Heslett had strong views on the subject and insisted that anything that makes the wearer conspicuous is out of place on the links. Outrageous or indifferent dressing raises remarks about athletic women. We must prevent disparaging remarks disparaging remarks which are too apt to be made after a large ladies' golf meeting. Non-golfers were delighted to find something to criticise. The aim of all lady golfers of the present day must be to abolish the absurd but popular belief, which must have started somewhere, that a golfing girl is a weird and terrible creature clad in the most extraordinary garments, striding along with a self-possessed walk, oblivious to everything but her beloved game. Gradually over time, women's golfing apparel became looser and less buttoned up. If you had tight sleeves and restrictive blouses that affected your swing, fashion was costing your matches. Jerseys and knitted apparel were the new style of clothing, which started to appear from the 1910s onwards. But it was the First World War that changed fashions for both genders. We see a freer style for men and women wearing an increase of knitwear. There were simpler silhouettes, lighter fabrics in summer, and women lost the corset. Having risked their lives and witnessed the horrors of war, there was a desire for comfort. Thanks in part to the border knitwear companies such as Pringle and Lyle & Scott, we see the introduction of new options for all golfers. By the 1920s, more loose and manageable clothes were making a scene. A button-down blouse and a simple cardigan sweater and a below-the-knee pleated skirt, for example. Two-piece knitted outfits with drop waists enabled women to have more freedom, comfort, and ease of movement. Obviously, the fashions of the links reflected the day-to-day styles. Clothing changed with women's changing roles in society. Although society women continued to wear more conservative dresses, the sportswear worn by forward-looking and younger women became the greatest change in post-First World War fashion. And I just want to show you this fabulous image of these models wearing highly patterned vests and pleated skirts. I think this was taken at Stoke Poges. The straight-line chemise topped by a close-fitting cloche hat became the uniform of the day. Women bobbed or cut their hair short to fit under these hats. The styles which allowed for the new style of dance, the Charleston, also enabled female golfers to fully use their athletic bodies to a much greater impact. And again, going back to the women golfers from the LGU albums, we see Joyce Weathered here in 1921 at the English Close Championship. I love her matching skirt and sweater that she has on, and her quite elaborate beret that she's wearing. And then again in 1929, here in St Andrews, so at the end of the decade, she's chosen a much simpler felt cloche hat, and as has her competitor, Glenna Collette. This image is one of my favourite all-time golfing photographs, and that's why I used it for publicity. Margaret Hamilton, again in the Women's Amateur in 1929. The attitude comes across through the screen, doesn't it? Hugely stylish two-tone leather shoes, a skirt, her berry hat, smoking on the Swilcan Bridge, and wearing what looks to be a cat sweater. I can think of no more appropriate outfit for me. I would love to wear this as a cat fan. It shows her confidence to wear this kind of outfit on the golf course here in St Andrews and sitting on the Swilcan Bridge posing for this photograph. Then by the 1930s, we have a more simpler skirt being worn by the women with pleats in the front, again to allow for greater ease of movement. Their cardigans are belted at their waists. They're all kind of matching, the two Barton sisters, Wanda Morgan and Jessie Valentine there. Jessie and Wanda are actually carrying their handbags as well, so a new accessory for them. For men of this period in the 20s and 30s, again, there's liberalisation of fashion. The men take off their jackets on some occasions and put on their V-neck sweaters. As we can see here, Jean Sarrazin wearing quite a highly patterned version of that sweater. They would also change, some golfers, including Bobby Jones here, wearing a bow tie and matching Argyle socks as well. A great forerunner of the style of the +4s and +2s was Edward VIII. In 1922, the knitters of Shetland sent a parcel of knitwear to Princess Mary on the occasion of her marriage. Apparently, a Fair Isle pattern jumper was enclosed in the parcel and came into the hands of her brother Edward, who just loved it and wore it for golf. And we can see this as evident in his portrait, which hangs again in the clubhouse in the big room. When the Prince came to St Andrews to drive into office as captain in 1922, there was around 6,000 people came to watch. And reputedly later in the day, the number had risen to 10,000 people coming to watch. He was a huge star. And the fact that he loved this style of clothing and wanted to be depicted not as a future monarch, which he would later abdicate the throne, not even in his red captain's jacket as the club requested, but he wanted to be depicted as a young, fashionable golfer, wearing his Argyle socks, his +4s, and what looks to me as a Fair Isle jumper. Now, a few years ago, I wrote to a curator in Shetland and asked her about this image and about the jumper. And she suggested to me that the fit is of a feminine style, and the sort of boat neck opening as well suggests that it could be for a present that was given to her, to his sister. I'm not sure on that, but it is a fascinating look into what he loved to wear out on the course. He hugely popularised this kind of knitwear as the new kind of sportswear. The demand for these brightly coloured handmade jumpers resulted in the growth of a thriving industry on Fair Isle. They became so popular that most students, Oxford, Cambridge and likely St Andrews, owned one. And we start to see Fair Isle hats, gloves and cardigans everywhere. And then looking at the albums again, we see the ladies wearing them again here in 1923 at Ganton. With the popularity of the game spreading across the world, more and more American golfers were having an impact on the Open Championship, and with that, their clothing. Walter Hagen was the first native-born American to win the Open Championship in 1922, and he ushered in a new era of modern golfers and new fashions. He was known as a dashing and assertive character who raised the status of professional golf and improved their earnings. He was widely known for his wardrobe and, while playing, featured expensive tailored clothes in bright colours and plush fabrics. Hagen may have been the first sportsman to earn $1 million in his career. He once stated that he never wanted to be a millionaire, just to live like one. He also expressed his creed in these words: "Don't hurry, don't worry, you're only here for a short time, so be sure to smell the flowers along the way." And I'm sure it helps if you're in a lovely, luxurious fabric. At a later date, we see the adoption of those +4s and +2s. These trousers, which are just hanging around the corner in our display, were worn by the 1951 Open champion Max Faulkner in 1970. A golfing extrovert, his clothes reflected his colourful character. During one match, he walked from green to tee on his hands, commenting that, "I needed to get the blood to the brain." Such antics earned him the nickname the Clown Prince of Golf. His reason for wearing such colourful clothes stemmed from a hospital stay. Noticing the contrast of the bright bouquet against the grey pallor of the hospital ward, he pledged that he would always dress in exuberant styles on the golf course to celebrate the sheer joy of living. Similarly, Payne Stewart, such a popular American golfer on the course, had his own distinctive and retro style. In an article which is on the PGAtour.com, it reports that Stewart said, "Hell, we all just look the same." Payne Stewart told a newspaper reporter when looking at all his fellow playing pros back in 1982. His father had given him some sage advice, though, about what to do next. The easiest way to stand out in a crowd was to dress differently, and polo shirts and pants were no way to go through life on the tour. He remembered Roger Davis and the +2 trousers he liked to wear. "I thought he looked different and neat," but he decided to crank the volume up a tad. He bought several pairs of baggy +4s and topped the look off with a peaked hat. Payne Stewart would eventually sign an innovative clothing deal with the National Football League of America to wear the team colours of local NFL franchises. And this is a photograph of him during the Open Championship in 1999. Gloria Monoprio's appearance in the English Ladies' Championship in 1933 caused a considerable stir. She used only one club to play, but more significantly became the first woman to wear trousers at a major ladies' championship. Although practical, her outfit was deemed inappropriate, partly because it was so well cut and close-fitting to her body. She also wore, in the same navy colour, a turtleneck sweater and woolen cap, which resembled a turban. Again, these items are part of our collection with the Women Golfers Museum loan. She accompanied this clothing look with red lipstick and very pale makeup, which some described as mask-like. The LGU issued a statement expressing concern and regret at such a departure from the traditional costume of the game. This voiced a fear that the wearing of trousers by ladies would result in a slip in standards of etiquette. Apparently, she didn't speak to her fellow competitors, although from looking at the Lady Golf Union albums, you can see that she is interacting with her competitors. Not only did she wear them this year, in 1933, she wore them for the 2 further consecutive championships. And the result was that she inspired other women to wear trousers. In fact, the following year, we start to see women winning the competition wearing trousers. At the time, it was written about as being a publicity stunt, but for me, looking at it, it was a way of breaking boundaries and allowing for greater choice on the golf course for women. By the end of the 1930s, more women began to wear what was known as divided skirts or trouser skirts. Sporting trousers became more widely available in different lengths and fittings. There was much more of an emphasis on practicality at this point. Through the war years and after, however, clothing coupons and rations resulted in plainer clothing for everyone. Now, just this morning on Facebook, I noticed the Lee Miller Archive posted this on their Facebook, and I wanted to include it because it just seemed very apt. This was taken by Lee Miller, the photographer, in 1943 for Vogue magazine. Their caption said, in the 1943 Vogue feature entitled "In Scotland Now," Lee captured 2 models posing as golfers. According to the magazine, Glasgow Style had evolved from snuff-coloured tweeds to clear colours, rainbow rather than heather mixtures. I love that description. Other details from the article include the news that the department store Daly's had hired a French chef to craft legendary shoppers' lunches, despite rationing, and had plans to lecture on balancing taste and austerity during wartime. I just love this image of the Glaswegian golfers. I wonder where it was taken. They didn't go into details on that, but you can see the style of their shoulder pads here in their jackets and their coiffured hair, looking glamorous while there's a war on. By the 1950s, we start to see more colour being injected. So much so that many commentators remarked that too many colours would result in women looking untidy. Teddy Tingling, who designed the uniform for the 1954 Curtis Cup players, maintained that a woman looked untidy if her ensemble included more than 2 colours. And we do see that in the team events, women are restricted with the colours of their blazers and skirt. When some of the players showed up wearing shorts at the 1957 US Women's Open at Winged Foot, the officials had to do a bit of scrambling since the club rule did not permit shorts. By the first tee time, players received a special dispensation to wear their shorts. You can see from this photograph the styles modelled by Sir Michael and Angela Lady Benalick in this photo of the 1957 Open Mixed Foursomes at Sunningdale. They epitomise a stylish golfing couple of this period, wearing the trousers and sweaters. Now, the artist Paul Brasson, in his latest painting, which is the newest addition to the big room in the clubhouse, used this photograph as inspiration for this beautiful portrait named Golf's Golden Couple and Don't They Shine. He's chosen to use the rich colours for both of their sweaters, which I'm not sure if that was an accurate depiction of what they were wearing, but it's beautiful nonetheless. By the 1960s, we see more streamlined outfits, and this model couple are wearing the sort of suede jacket for the women and the matching kind of streamlined jacket of the 1960s. But knitwear is still important. Some people would even knit their own garments. Obviously, knitting was there to keep you warm, and that's traditionally what women were doing in the home. But I love this photograph of Bridget Jackson and Belle Robertson of 1960. I don't know if Belle knitted this herself, but it's harking back to that Fair Isle pattern. And don't they look wonderful? In the 1970s, we start to see more fitted outfits with long pointy collars on the shirts, lots of polyester being worn. Nancy Lopez wore a skirt for the first time, a wraparound skirt. And in this wonderful piece that is again on display from 1976 is a Slazenger catalogue. And we have Brian Barnes in the cream jumper there acting as a model. Brian, famously, his father-in-law was Max Faulkner, so the two men loved a stylish look on the course. Now, this introduction of colour at this point in history really links to the introduction of colour television. The first time the Open Championship is broadcast in colour is in 1969, and from this point on, golfers want to be spotted on the course. They want to be spotted on television. So we see a huge increase in the wearing of different colours and bright patterned trousers. Obviously, it also reflects the fashion of the period in the 1970s. Whilst golfers may want to show their individuality on the course, team events require symmetry, balance, and uniform. Here we have Walter Hagen again, this time as US team captain of the Ryder Cup in 1929, and you can see the players in their matching two-tone shoes, slacks, blazers, and ties. Even their haircuts are similar. Within the museum's collection, we have items from John Panton, who was a Scottish professional golfer who represented Great Britain 3 times in the Ryder Cup and was also honorary professional of the club. In contrast to some of the other personalities I've spoken about, Panton was a quiet and unassuming man. Having played for the Ryder Cup 3 times, his team blazer and hat shows how styles have changed. Compared to the sportswear of today, which focuses on fashion and performance technology, the hat in particular, which looks a bit homemade, has a much more traditional look. I love it nonetheless. Again, for women of this period in team events, this is in 1986, the Curtis Cup players. Again, this sticking to the 2-colour rule, I have to say, with the GBNI and American teams in their national colours. Patriotic colours are extremely prevalent in the women's team events, particularly Team USA, who often wear the stars and stripes in their accessories. Not only golfing personalities seek to present a particular image or affiliation through their clothing, club golfers wear sweaters and ties bearing their club crest. And in this way, they very clearly identify themselves with their home club, helping to foster a sense of belonging. Club dress codes have received growing coverage in the golfing press as clubs try to attract and maintain membership. Debates continue over what seems appropriate. The most visible symbol of membership for the Royal and Ancient Golf Club for men is the club tie. And strange as it may seem today, the introduction of the tie was a contentious issue in 1926 when the idea was first considered. The Committee of Management held a referendum among the members to decide on the matter. 91 members voted against the idea, but 340 voted in favour. So it was decided in May 1927 to create a club tie on a design of St Andrew on the cross in white against a dark blue background, which was approved. The Open sees a growth in glamour by the 1960s, with players such as Arnold Palmer and others growing the popularity of the championship. By the 1970s, players like Jack Nicklaus and Doug Sanders were lighting up the links with their colourful outfits. This photograph from 1970 from the Open at St Andrews shows Nicklaus and Sanders as they go head-to-head for the claret jug. Sanders was famed for his large wardrobe and showcased his choices to the media in 1967, laying out his trousers and tops. Tony Jacklin, also winner of the Open and US Open, had a varied career and is often pictured in the golfing periodicals modelling the fashions of the day. And here he is, letting us into his wardrobe, showing off his brightly coloured slacks, and that's how it's titled. During the 1980s and 90s, polo shirts, collars turned upwards in the 1980s and down in the 1990s, were worn with knitted vests and Pringle jumpers at the height of their popularity, both in vogue for women like Laura Davis here winning the Women's Open in 1987, and for men, Sir Nick Faldo wearing his Pringle jumper famously. And his association with Pringle and the geometric George pattern, which again we have one of his sweaters and t-shirts on display in the collection. Faldo famously re-wore his jumpers in the 2015 Open when he retired from the championship. The entry of companies like Nike into the golf market helped to promote a new kind of athleisure and performance in golf clothing. We have donations in the collection from Tiger Woods from the 2000 Open at St Andrews, his shirt, cap and glove, which he wore. He famously obviously wears a red shirt in the final round of a championship and now has his very own brand, Sunday Red. Today, players are being dressed by some of the leading clothing designers with replica clothes and lines available for all golfers to purchase. Players and the brands they work for showcase looks on social media and on their websites and provide shoppable links for fans to purchase the exact outfits. I remember when Rory McIlroy won the Open in 2014, when I walked to work the next day, there was an exact replica of his polo shirt in Ochterlony's window. We have seen that individual style and practicality have come together, where players of the past were limited in their choices of fabrics, cuts and styles, and also in what was deemed appropriate for the links. It appears that modern superstar golfers can choose what they want to wear. Today's golfing attire is a far cry from the heavy tweeds and restrictive garments of the past. It embodies high-tech approach, featuring materials that are lightweight, breathable and weather-resistant. Technology has played a pivotal role in the transformation of this. Fabrics that wick away moisture, stretchable blends that offer a full range of motion, and even UV protective materials are now standard. The shift is not about comfort. It's not just about comfort. It significantly impacts a player's performance, allowing for greater flexibility and endurance on the course. Now, I selected this image from Adidas's website just this week. It's a golf polo with legacy Adidas style. The caption says that it brings heritage Adidas style to your round in this golf polo with an Oliver print of tiny trifolds. The soft cotton blend delivers all-day comfort from course to the clubhouse. The shirt is styled with a skirt and the hugely popular shoe of the moment, the Gazelle trainers. This preppy look is designed for the social media generation, whilst actually remaining wearable for all golfers. They have very inclusive sizes on their website, which I was pleased to see. During and after the COVID-19 pandemic, we start to see an increase in the desire for more casual clothing in all parts of life. Sales of loungewear sets went through the roof, and with golf being one of the loud sports during the lockdowns, we saw an increase in the number of players, often non-club members. We also saw a number of independent golf manufacturers and designers rise, and in the US companies like Eastside Golf, founded in the 1st of June 2019, they have a very clear mission. Eastside Golf is a lifestyle golf brand developed to raise awareness about golf among youth and non-golfers. They want to inspire the culture and promote diversity and continue to be authentic. They teamed up with Nike and their hugely popular, iconic trainer, the Air Jordans, named after Michael Jordan, the basketball player and golfer, and released the trainers like these in 2021. They sold out immediately, and resale values of these trainers often surpass, if you can believe it, $5,000. Where does golf clothing go from here? There are still debates that go on in clubhouses around the world, and social media pages as well. And so, what is appropriate? Discussions over skirt and short lengths, the wearing of hoodies and non-collared shirts. There is so much more choice these days. And with some clubs like the Bristol Golf Club doing away with dress codes entirely to increase accessibility, will this be the way forward? In the women's game, I have read articles about the need for more choice, not just pink clothing available, with greater size inclusivity and cost inclusivity. There will always be the need to feel part of the sport that you choose to play. Your clothing dictates your status, and golf clothes carry such a strong aesthetic identity. It can reveal so much about class, gender, social norms, as well as individual style. Dress can be used to represent different aspects of a golfer's career. It can form a key part in defining roles and allegiances. National and international team events allow strong country and team loyalty to be displayed. Club golfers can choose to illustrate their affiliation through their dress, helping to establish a feeling of belonging. Through clothing, stories are told and images are presented. Thank you very much for listening. That was a whistle-stop tour of golf clothing from the earliest beginnings to modern day. Thank you very much for listening, and I'm happy to answer any questions.